Hello and welcome to the video. In this video, very quickly going to talk about this thing here. This is the new HX camera from Amazon for the Connex Prosight system. Now, we already have a complete playlist for the Connex Prosight, and we've gone through and talked about how you set it up, the common gotchas, also talked about the latest firmware update that you're actually going to need to run this little guy. But one of the things that I've kind of noticed that are kicking about is there's lots of videos showing footage from this little guy, but not many people are really talking about why you'd actually use it and what the differences are for this little thing over the standard camera that the Connex has been shipping with before. Particularly for those of you that have had a Connex Prosight for a while and kind of looking at the camera and thinking, well, what do I need to be aware of? Why is it different from the camera that I've got in my model already? Now, this was actually one of the beta units that I was doing some testing with, so I've been playing with this for a good couple of months, and I need to say a very big thank you to the guys at Amazon who have been very helpful in trying to help me figure out how to not only use this but also to answer these questions that I've been getting over the last couple of months. So here's what we're going to talk about. First of all, this new HX camera is available as a separate thing from Amazon. I'll put a link in the description. It is relatively expensive, but it is a HD camera. It isn't like the other ones that we look at on the channel from people like Foxy, Runcam and others. It's physically the same size as the original. Now, looking at this, you're probably thinking, hang on a minute, that looks slightly different from the camera that's on my model. And that's because the camera in the kit, if you think back to how it came in the box, is actually covered in a rubber cover. If you remove that rubber cover, then this is the camera, or very similar to what it looked like underneath. Now, you may occasionally hear of this camera being called the Red camera, and that was its kind of code name as it was developed. So if you're ever coming across somebody who's talking about the Connex Red camera, they're actually talking about this, which is the new Prosight HX camera. There's a new sensor type which gives a lot of new features. Again, you have to make sure you're running the latest and greatest version of the software, ideally later than 5.4.11, to access those HX settings. And those settings include the ability to change the frequency, and you also have options for things like the color and saturation as too. Lots more control with this camera than with the previous ones where you only had a couple of modes. The modes that are available on this is only really two, but they're a superset of what the original camera provided. The original camera either gave you an option of a true 720p at 30 frames a second or a 720 interlaced image at 60 frames a second, and that roughly gave you the same amount of data, trying to squeeze it through the same bit of bandwidth. Now, lots of pilots had particular likings for one of those modes or the other, but what we really wanted was to run at 720p at full 60 frames a second. So there's no interlacing, it was just a complete full frame of 720p as often as you could get it, and that's exactly what this camera is here. So this chap means that you don't have to settle for 30 frames a second. It also means that you don't have to settle for an interlaced image, which can look a bit meh. It's a slightly wilder field of view on this guy. It's a 1.4mm lens, so it's about 126 degrees versus 105 degrees horizontally, so it's a little bit of a nicer picture, and there's a little bit more vertically as well. So if you're used to flying the older camera, you'll be able to see a little bit more to the sides and a little bit more above and below it as well. There is one consideration that you have to think about, apart from the fact that you have to be on the very latest and greatest firmware, is you're going to have to watch the bandwidth settings. The system will figure it out, but if you're used to flying lots of Connex people at an event, because the image that's coming down from the camera is a full 720p 50 or 60 frames a second, it needs slightly more bandwidth to get all that data down to the receiver in a timely manner. So whereas with the older camera it would use kind of a little bit of the spectrum, this camera it needs a little bit more, so you're just going to have to be aware of that if you're trying to fly lots of different people around and you're getting a bit tight on space. So hopefully that explains what this HX camera is about, and answers some of those questions for those of you that might have been looking at this and wondering whether or not it was worthwhile upgrading. Thank you for taking the time to watch that video, and particularly for watching right to the very end. We try and release a video on Tuesday and Friday, and sometimes we'll release 1 or 2 extra ones in a week as well. All of the videos on the channel are organised into easy to use playlists, so do have a look in there, because if you're interested in a subject, we organise all the videos on that subject so you can find them easily all together in one place. If you like what we're doing, then please like and subscribe and tell others about the channel so they can come and join as well. We're available in all of the usual social media places, particularly in places like Instagram, Twitter, and we also share all of our 3D designs on Thingiverse.